Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, depending where you are in Canada. My name is Marvin Rotrand. Many of you know me. I am a former Montreal City Councillor. I served between 1982 and 2021 on the Montreal Council. After that, I served for a couple of years as the National Director for the League for Human Rights, B'nai B'rith Canada. And since February 2024, I have been the Director General of United Against Hate Canada. Let me tell you a little bit about the mission of United Against Hate Canada. We are building alliances to combat hate aimed at racial, ethnic, sexual, and religious minorities. And we do that primarily by promoting cross-cultural dialogue and partnerships. On this call, or if they're not here already, soon will be some of our partner organizations, including the Filipino Heritage Society. We work closely with Mr. Al Abdon and the Heritage Society to promote Filipino Heritage Month. And we've convinced dozens of municipalities across Canada to adopt motions to recognize the Heritage Month. And that's often led to flag raisings at City Hall and events to promote Filipino culture. We work closely with the Tamil community, particularly in the Tamil Genocide Monument Project. Our colleague Perry Belendra, who's a member of our board and active in several of the major organizations of the Tamil community, is here this evening. We also work closely with the Caribbean Coalition Network. We want to promote Emancipation Day. The president, Sharon Nelson, who is also the first vice president of the Jamaica Association of Montreal and a commissioner of the English Montreal School Board, will be one of our speakers this evening. The vice president of the Caribbean Coalition Network, Cynthia Waite, is here with us. She's also the president of Barbados House. Now, during the time that I was a city councillor, I worked closely with the late Dan Phillip, the longtime president of the Black Coalition of Quebec, La Ligue des Noirs de Quebec. Dan felt, and rightly so, that too few Canadians know about the history of slavery in Canada. And he wanted some recognition that slavery existed in New France as well as in British Canada. He also wanted Montrealers to know about Marie-Joseph Angélique, who was executed on June 21st, 1734, a young Black woman accused of arson. We're not sure if she was really guilty or not, but however, the consensus is she was hanged because she was troublesome and felt that slavery was an abomination. With Dan's help, we worked to get a park named in Montreal in honor of Marie-Joseph Angélique. And in a few minutes, we'll show you the stamp that the post office has issued to honor her. We worked to raise consciousness about Nigger Rock and getting it cited by Parks Canada. It's an informal cemetery in Saint Armand, Quebec, a burial place for enslaved Black people. Most people don't know it existed, and people insisted it couldn't exist because slavery didn't exist in Canada. It did. We work with the Black Coalition to recognize August 23rd as the International Day for the remembrance of the slave trade, of the transatlantic slave trade and its abolition. The current president of the Black Coalition of Quebec, Stanley Bazin, will speak to that a little later this evening. Our goal in convening this evening is as follows: educating Canadians that slavery existed in Canada, promoting the growth of the commemoration of Emancipation Day. We want that event to grow every year so that it ultimately has the type of recognition that Juneteenth has in the United States. We want people to know more about the Underground Railroad and its connection to Canada. September is International Underground Railroad Day, and that needs to be something that we promote. And we want Canadians in particular to have knowledge of Harriet Tubman in Canada. Most Canadians have no idea that she lived here for over 10 years. Most Canadians don't know that the terminus of the Underground Railroad was in Canada. And it comes as a surprise that many found their freedom here and that Harriet Tubman played a prominent role in Canada as she did in the United States. Our goal ultimately from this first meeting is to hope that a working group can be put together to promote the above stated goals. We hope ultimately to build a high school history curriculum that we can pitch at education ministers in all provinces and territories. We better want to disseminate existing toolkits and existing scholarships so students learn more about slavery that existed right here in Canada. And we want them to know about how it was abolished and what that actually meant. And we want them to know about the heroes of the Underground Railroad, including Harriet Tubman. I'd like to give a special thanks to Rochelle Bush, the resident historian of Salem Chapel, the British Methodist Episcopal Church in St. Catherine, which was founded by the early Black community of St. Catherine's in the very early part of the 19th century, and which was strengthened by freedom seekers, including Harriet Tubman's in the 1850s. Rochelle, as you know, was on the original program, but had unfortunately a personal issue arise and had to leave the call. I want to thank her for helping set up our having Rosemary Sadler on the call to take her place and to speak of issues that Rosemary is working on. Rochelle is the founder of Tubman Tours. She's a noted historian, and uh, last at the last minute, she ensured that while she couldn't be here, that not only Rosemary would be here, but others would be as well. I'm going to show 6 quick slides about some of the issues we think are important before we go to the screenshots in a moment, and then we go to Rosemary Sadler. Mr. Mandin, would you show the first slide?
I'm getting kind of tired of drinking this much, Patrick. I don't want this
They
much.
say that slavery didn't exist in Canada, but effectively it did. The Code Noir was first issued in 1685 by Louis XIV to govern slavery in the French territories, and that included Canada. This version you see in front of you is the humane version of 1743. Why was it humane? Because certain changes were made after the execution of Marie-Joseph Angelique. Second slide, please. So the post office eventually did issue a stamp for Marie-Joseph Angelique, and the city of Montreal, in naming the park, invited the population to learn more of her. Third slide, Act to Limit Slavery. Act to Limit Slavery, that's it. The Act to Limit Slavery is the first effort anywhere in the British Dominions to try to prevent the growth of slavery. It was adopted in Upper Canada in Upper Canada in
Keep
1790.
talking over here.
It was Governor John Graves Simcoe made it illegal to import slaves into Upper Canada, now Ontario. However, slaves that were already there, and there were many, brought by those leaving the United States after the Revolution who brought their slaves with them, they could legally keep their slaves. This became the first effort anywhere in the British world to try to do something about slavery. Next slide, please, Mr. Mandin.
Yeah.
Here it
We
is,
start
slavery,
to log out.
the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833. This is the act that a year later led to Emancipation Day on August 1st, 1834. It did not immediately free the slaves. Those who were more than the age of 5 had to continue working as apprentices for 5 full years before receiving their freedom. Can we have the next page, Mr. Mandin? This was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, adopted by the American Congress in September 1850, that made it dangerous even for freed blacks in the North. Those who fled to the North could no longer guaranteed the right to live there in relative safety. Slave catchers could come and deport them. And this gave rise to the Underground Railroad, including Harriet Tubman leaving Philadelphia to come to Canada. Final slide, please. A warning poster issued by abolitionists in Boston. Clearly, the Fugitive Slave Act divided Americans. It was one of the acts that eventually would lead to the Civil War. Here's a warning given to people of color urging them to be very, very careful and to watch out for slave catchers. We'll learn a lot more about these themes later in the evening. I then now invite Mr. Mandin to take a few screenshots, which we'll use later when we post about this call. It allows me the great pleasure of introducing a prominent social justice and Black history advocate. I'm really honored to have Rosemary Sadler with us. Rosemary was the president of the Ontario Black History Society from 1993 to 2015. As president, she contributed to the recognition of Black history through education, research, and outreach programs. Rosemary's pressure was central to the Canadian government's 1995 decision to make the celebration of Black History Month a national annual event. Rosemary was born and raised in Toronto. She has degrees in teaching and social work. Her roots in Canada reach back to pre-Confederation. Her mother's family can be traced to 1840, while her father's ancestors arrived in New Brunswick in 1793. Along with the 1995 establishment of the National Black History Month, in the same year, Sadler also initiated the formal celebration of August 1st as Emancipation Day, which is still being sought nationally. For Rosemary, such events have helped and will continue to help Canadian students and teachers to recognize contributions of Black people in Canada. Rosemary has presented nationally and internationally, including to the United Nations on the subject of Black Canadian history, curricula, and anti-racism. She's also researched and written prolifically about Black history and Black Canadian history. Rosemary has received several honors and awards, including the Order of Ontario, the William Peyton Hubbard Race Relations Award, Women for Peace Award, the Black Links Award, the Planet Africa Marcus Garvey Award, and the Harry Jerome Award. Most recently, she was awarded the Lifetime Achievers Award from the International Women's Achievers Awards. Rosemary, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to share some slides because I think that that will help in terms of making this a little bit more interesting, perhaps. But while I'm trying to set this up, bear with me. We had no tech check really. I want you to know that I'm here, as you already heard, because Rochelle Bush was unable to make it this evening for a range of different unfortunate reasons. And I want you to know that Rochelle had been in Toronto and had volunteered with the Ontario Black History Society for a period of time. And she made the very, I think, incredibly important choice to return to her ancestral roots and go to St. Catharines so that she could become proficient and become the curator for the Salem Chapel British Methodist Episcopal Church of Canada, Harriet Tubman's church. So I'm here filling in at the last minute. And I hope that you enjoy the slides that I have prepared for you. Hopefully you can see them. Let me know that you can. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So that's me. That's my name. I'm just going to try and get this lined up for you a bit, if I can, because you can see the presenter notes and I don't want you to see that. Oh, and maybe that's just not going to move for me. Okay, it's not going to move for me. So, how am I going to do that? Okay, I'm going to just go through this anyway, and I will figure that out. Okay, so this is me. It's not moving. So we.
Okay, hold on.
Okay. All right. Let's try this again. Check. This is why you do check checks. This side won't move. I don't know why it won't. It should.
Mr. Mandin, can you suggest something that could help here? I think Rosemary, we're going to have to find a solution on ours. I'm not our own. I think Mr. Mandin may have stepped away.
Okay.
It's possible that you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard.
That's what I'm using on my keyboard. Okay, let's see what happens. Oh, that works, but I have no presenter notes. So that's a bit unfortunate. That's me, my pronouns. we should do a land acknowledgement. I don't have my First Nations land acknowledgement handy. It's in the presenter notes, which I am unable to access, but I do have the African ancestral acknowledgement, which I'm going to read to you now. I would like to acknowledge that this land was settled and supported very early by people of African descent, the first named African being translator Matthew da Costa by 1604, and to acknowledge the ongoing and seminal contribution made by him and those who preceded and followed in Canada's development. I acknowledge the many people of African descent who are not settlers, but those whose ancestors were forcibly displaced as part of the Atlantic slave trade, brought against their will and made to work on these lands. We must acknowledge that African Canadians were an integral part of Canadian history, an integral part of shaping Canadian history, and our history would not be the same without the Black experience. So I think this is really important in terms of setting the stage for tonight, but I will go on without my speaker notes to try and fill you in on some more. So this is me in February 1996. And why am I here with Jean Chrétien, the Prime Minister of Canada? Why am I presenting him with an art print by David Kubuka? Why am I on stage, the only non-elected person in Canada with the Black Caucus at the time, which included Ovid and Jean and Hetty, and unofficially Sheila Cox? I was there because I had done the groundwork to ensure that there was a thing called February as Black History Month that would be formally recognized in this country. I built up a community of interest by providing over 2,000 Black history presentations in community organizations, businesses, schools, in order to create an appetite for this celebration. And it was my fervent belief at the time that what would come from this is a required Black history education, which we still do not have. I am the person, this is from the Government of Canada's material. In 1993, the OBHS, the Ontario Black History Society, the only provincial heritage organization in Canada with a focus on Black history in this country, successfully filed a petition in Ontario to proclaim February as Black History Month, building upon our success with the municipality of Toronto. Following that success, which I championed at municipally and provincially, Rosemary Sadler, me, president of the Ontario Black History Society, introduced the idea of having Black History Month recognized across Canada. The idea came from community up and was taken to Jean Augustine to move it through the House. And there we all are. And one senator at the time, which seems kind of funny that we have so many now, which is wonderful. This was the 20th anniversary where both Jean Augustine and myself were being honored by Selena César-Chavannes and Melanie Joly. And that was the 20th anniversary. 2026 will be the 30th anniversary of February as Black History Month.
Amazing.
Important for you to realize how these things happen. They take time. This is in 2008 when I had already been on the path following a similar procedure to have August 1st recognized as Emancipation Day in this country. I began that journey in 1994. I was successful with the City of Toronto, Metro Toronto, the City of Ottawa, and in 2008, it was unanimous with all parties making it possible for August 1st to be recognized in Ontario. It had already gone to second reading twice in the House under Deepak Obdrai, but didn't go through. It went to second reading twice with the Senate, with the support of Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard, but it did not go through. It was not until March 2021 on a private member's bill by Majid Jahare that August 1st as Emancipation Day was recognized as a national celebration in this country. I am the Opal Lee of Canada. Another successful nomination was through Historic Sites and Monuments Board, where a national recognition of celebrations of Emancipation Day was also successfully launched in 2024. Since Emancipation Day has been made a national recognition, a national celebration, the Rosemary Sadler Freedom Award was created by Emancipation Arts and Free Up, and it has been broadcast by CBC. I'm also a best-selling author. This is my most recent book. I've written 8, I think. The Kids' Book of Black History in Canada. It's recognized by the Canadian Children's Book Center, by the Ontario Library Association. It was most featured by Indigo, is available on Amazon. I'm the author, and the artist who did incredible work is Arden Taylor. Why should you have this book? Because the first question that I posed, we should have a national requirement for Black history to be recognized across this country. It has not yet happened.
Oh,
And
how do
unfortunately,
I get my,
I'm sorry, don't speak over me.
like my,
In the province of Ontario, there was supposed to be the launching of Black history curricula starting very late for grade 7, 8, and 10, which I also helped to work on, but the province has chosen to postpone that. So this book, for people of African descent who want to have something to begin to prep their children with, I think is incredibly important, not just because I wrote it, but because it's accessible and everyone can get one. Schools and parents and kids. Black history didn't start in Canada, started in Africa. This is a preferred projection showing Africa in its truer size. We know that there are many kingdoms that developed in Africa prior to the enslavement of African peoples. It's very important to remember that our history doesn't begin with slavery, but it was certainly interrupted by slavery. This is a map which indicates the breadth and range of where enslaved people were captured and where they were brought to. And this is the Reader's Digest version, but essentially the heavier, the thicker arrows show where the greater number of people were extracted. And we see where they were deposited because they were just cargo. They were deposited in South America. They were deposited in Europe as well, but they were deposited significantly in the Caribbean and the United States. Generally speaking, enslaved people did not come directly from Africa to Canada. They came with people who owned them, or they came because they were making themselves free. The Underground Railroad has been mentioned, and I'm going to see if this will work. Because we're focused, number one, look at all these arrows. It's a massive system. It's not a single system. It's not one place, go from one place to another. You know, a modern day misconception is that everybody's Black is from Jamaica. The historic misconception is that there was one route, one trail that took people or encouraged people or provided safety for people to leave from the southern United States and make their way into Canada. That's true, but there were many, many routes. Harriet Tubman's preferred route, and I don't know if my cursor will show for you, began in the Bucktown, Maryland area, because that's where she went back to within the slave states after learning about possibilities and support for freedom, not just in Bucktown, but also during a brief period that she was in Philadelphia. She followed the Combahee River north, made her way through New York State, following the tips of the Finger Lakes, crossing at Niagara Falls, New York, and then into Niagara Falls, Ontario, and then a further probably 20 kilometers, 20 miles, one of them, into St. Catharines, Ontario, where she lived for at least 10 years, 8 to 10 years, making her home, making her base the corner of North and Geneva. That is where you will find the British Methodist Episcopal Church of Canada, one location of this many-faceted church, Black institution, founded and incorporated in 1856. My ancestors, as you may have already heard, came into Canada. Both of my parents are Black, for anyone who's confused. My mother's family are Underground Railroad survivors arriving in Canada in the 1830s. And my father's family came into Canada at the invitation of the British to be free, arriving in New Brunswick in 1783 as Black loyalists, late loyalists, and refugees of the War of 1812. Here is Harriet Tubman. I wrote a book about Harriet Tubman. I've actually written several. This is one that I did with Dunder and Press. It's part of a series called Quest Biographies. And Harriet Tubman, as you'll hear more, I'm sure Paul Lovejoy will be speaking more about her. And certainly the center at York University, where I was privileged to be at the opening that Paul helped to make happen, is a very important way of helping to keep her name out there. Harriet Tubman was an ardent abolitionist. She was a heroine of the Underground Railroad. Why? Because she was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. What is a conductor? They weren't on a train, ever, not really. The vast majority of means and ways that people came from enslavement in the United States and sometimes freedom in the United States into Canada was because they walked. That's why Canada was so popular. But you'll remember from the map I showed you earlier, people were also going into other areas. They were going into Mexico. They were going into Florida at one point in time because the laws were different there. She made as many as 11 to 19 rescue missions into the American South, and she guided perhaps as many as 300 people. But I think that the number of people that she guided personally, walking during the night, hiding during the day, that's not perhaps as important as the number of people she inspired to make the trip on their own.
Exactly.
She didn't guide everybody into Canada. Mary Ann Shadd is also an important person. I also wrote a book about her, the first Black woman publisher in North America. And her name is out there and needs to be heralded as well, because Black people and Black women in particular took a major role in effecting freedom for the community. It's important to remember that when slavery ended, everything wasn't over. And I think that that's the biggest problem tonight that we're looking at. The idea that we need to make Harriet Tubman more known when we're not in, we have yet to make the reality that Black people have been in this country since before Confederation known. We have yet to make it clear that Black people have been here and contributing and building institutions such as the British Methodist Episcopal Church from the very beginning. We are misled by the reality that Canada formed July 1st, 1867, because it covers up a 200-year experience of the enslavement of Africans and Pani or First Nations. So we, by virtue of the omission that has taken place and the erasure that has taken place, we don't even appreciate that there is Black history in this country. And people are shocked and horrified when they ask me where I'm from and I tell them here. It's like it doesn't compute because our school system has not allowed us, has not introduced us, has not reaffirmed the reality that diversity in this country existed from the very beginning. But to go back, you could be free after 1834 in this country, but still find that you would not be able to find a job. You could be free and still have to deal with prejudice and stereotypes based on your experience of having been enslaved as if it was your fault. And it's also important to remember that there is this thing called systemic racism, because the systems that came up into being that are common to Europe, the United States, and Canada all were created not necessarily with the flourishing of Black people in mind. Which is why 1 in 5 Black Canadians currently experience racial discrimination on a regular basis. Which is why a Black person in Toronto is nearly 20 times more likely to be shot and killed by police. Which is why Black Canadians face steeper economic challenges than white Canadians, regardless of how long their families have lived in Canada. So the question is, why don't we know more about Harriet Tubman? But the question is, why don't we know more about Black history? Why don't we know more about the Black presence in this country? And to go back to something that you said earlier, Marvin, I was on the Canada Post Stamp Advisory Committee for 2 terms. I was successful in being able to put forward names of people, places, and themes, which included Marie-Joseph Angélique, which included Olivier Lejeune, who I sought national recognition for, and many other things. I also want to say that not only have I been able to get Black History Month commemorated in this country, Emancipation Day recognized in this country, but also have a national day, or Martin Luther King Day, if so you might say, in terms of a national day with others, honoring Lincoln Alexander, who was our first Black vice regal, and also to see a bust of him erected in Queen's Park. And I want, because Dorothy Williams, I believe, is on this call, Dr. Dorothy Williams, I just want to shout out to her because she is an incredible source of information on Black history. And while I, of course, am going to talk about my book, I hope that she will talk about Black Biblio. I hope I said that right. And which reaffirms which gives you an option because we don't have required Black history. And for my Filipino watchers, I just want you to know that in October of last year, my friend Salome Mader it hosted me at her home in Bugo, San Remigio, and my favorite meal ever is chicken adobo, and I really do like ube. Mabuhay.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosemary. I just want to say this, I mean this quite sincerely. I think Canadians owe you a debt of gratitude. I served with Mayor Gerald Tremblay, and he always used to talk about the power of one. Could never really figure out what he was talking about. He really believed that it takes a determined, unique individual to often get the ball rolling, to move away the impediments and get stuff done. Your accomplishments, even if others were involved and supported you, are quite amazing. And it's helped transform the way Canadians look at each other. I quite agree with you. Far more needs to be done. But without Black History Month, without the adoption of Emancipation Day, we would be far poorer in our recognition of our joint history for good and bad. I very much appreciate what you've done. I'm also amazed we've never run into each other over the course of my very long career as a city councillor, in which often I was the sole voice of the Black community on Montreal City Council, and I do have quite a few friends in the community with whom I've worked on issues similar to the issues that you've raised, but we've never actually met. So perhaps this is the beginning of a new and beautiful friendship. I certainly hope so. A couple of things, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, some people already put up their hands. We're not going to take questions until a bit later in the evening, comments and questions. That's number one. Number two, before I go to Professor Paul Lovejoy, I want to recognize a couple of elected officials who are here who were not recognized at the beginning of the call, including City Councilor Sonny Morose from the District of Snowdon in the City of Montreal. Just for transparency's sake, Sonny was my successor in the District of Snowdon. I welcome him on this call. I also want to welcome Jan Gillette, who is the first Black person elected to city council in the city of Spruce Grove, Alberta, and who will be speaking a bit later, commenting on the speeches of the speakers and sharing some personal history with us. I also want to recognize Julian Feldman, school commissioner of the English Montreal School Board, who will be speaking. A debt of gratitude to Julian. When my second born was born, he worked for the Montreal Daily News and he had his photographer come take a picture. And the picture of our baby was on the front cover. So, Julian, I've never forgotten that. And finally, I also note Sharon Nelson, who I mentioned was first vice president of the Jamaica Association. She's also an elected official at commissioner of the English Montreal School Board, and she will be speaking later. Allow me to introduce Professor Paul Lovejoy. He's Professor Emeritus, Canadian Research Chair in African Diaspora History, a Distinguished Research Professor, Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. Professor Lovejoy will speak about the founding of the Harriet Tubman Institute at York University. He's held the Canadian Research Chair in African Diaspora History from 2000 to 2015. He was a member of the UNESCO Slave Route Project from 1996 to 2011 and continues as general editor of the Harriet Tubman series on the African diaspora. He was co-editor of the journal African Economic History for 37 years and has published more than 40 books. When I mentioned his name to a number of people on this call, people were astounded. How did you manage to get someone as important as Paul Lovejoy on the call? So your reputation precedes you. Paul, the floor is yours. You're muted, Paul. You're going to have to unmute yourself. You're still muted. We cannot hear you.
Actually, sir, he has a problem on his microphone. I think he has to come out and be back because there's a problem.
Okay, Paul, according to our tech guy, you're going to have to leave the call and come back. You have some sort of technical issue that can't be solved by clicking on and off your audio. So you're probably just going to have to leave and come back immediately. We can't hear you. Okay, well, in that case, has Professor Damilola Adebayo come on to the call? Professor Adebayo, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, we're going to have you speak, and we're going to put Paul after you. So let me introduce you. Professor Damilola Adebayo is a historian of Anglo-West Africa, particularly Nigeria. His research and teaching interests are at the intersection of the three fields, namely social and economic history, science, technology, and society, and the role of international organizations in the African past. He was a Cambridge Africa scholar and a speaker at York University's Tubman Talks. He'll speak about the Tubman Institute at York, where you are presently, I believe, one of the co-chairs. Professor Adebayo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address this distinguished audience. Thanks, Rotran, for Marvin, for inviting me. I was hoping that Professor Lovejoy would speak before me, and considering the fact that he is the founder of the institute where I am currently one of the interim co-directors, and I'm hoping that Professor Lovejoy would be able to provide additional information on the background to the institute and the back end, what went on, how he was able to use his influence, his massive influence at York University to establish a major center for research on Africa and its diasporas here in Toronto. Uh, for me today, I am basically going to be focusing on how the work of the Harriet Tubman Institute at York University is advancing the legacies of Harriet Tubman. And it is indeed a profound honor to speak before you all, not only as a professor at York University, but also as an interim director of the Tubman Institute. And I hope that in this moment of reflection, celebration, and forward-looking engagement, that my part would also spur us to further reflect and take action to preserve the legacies of Harriet Tubman in Canada. So the Tubman name evokes courage, it evokes resistance, it evokes an unyielding commitment to freedom. But I would like to shift our focus from the well-known chapters of her life, which Marvin had already highlighted in his own opening remark, which Rosemary has also mentioned in as part of our own engagement here this evening. I'd like to shift our focus from those well-known chapters to some aspects of the living legacies that Harriet Tubman left behind. One that continues to shape scholarship, continues to shape activism, and community building here in Toronto, in Canada, and around the world. So at the Harriet Tubman Institute at York University, we believe that uh, the Tubman legacy is not just something that we inherited, it is something that we must actively uphold. And we do this through thorough research, education, public engagement, and a commitment to justice that echoes Tubman's own relentless pursuit of liberation. So founded at York University by Professor Lovejoy around the mid-2000s, the Tubman Institute at York University is a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary research center dedicated to the study of global Africa, what Paul Lovejoy himself calls global Africa. In other words, Africa, the African continent, as well as its global diasporas, not only in the Caribbean, but also in Europe, in Asia, and in other parts of the world in which African studies is not really studied. So our work spans centuries, it spans continents, from pre-contact African civilizations to contemporary struggles against systemic racism and exploitation. The Tubman Institute at York is a hub for scholars, for students, for artists, for activists who seek to transform the world through the lens of the diasporic African experience, both the diasporic and the continental African experience. But what does it mean for the Tubman Institute to uphold Harriet Tubman's legacy in 2025? So it means creating spaces where difficult histories are not only studied but confronted. We all know that Black history, African history is not studied as much in Canada, but things are much more better today than they were in the early 90s or even in the early 2000s before people like Professor Paul Lovejoy created the Tubman Institute at York University. And one of the things that the Tubman has been doing is also amplifying voices that have long been silent. It means we've been building bridges between academic research and community actions. And we've also been asking questions every day on how we can make freedom real, not just for some, but for everyone. And let me talk about some of the initiatives that we've accomplished in this regard. So first, we are newly launching a virtual museum project, which has been developed in partnership with Digital Museums Canada, and it's tracing Harriet Tubman's footsteps through Southern Ontario. And although much has been written about Harriet Tubman's journey in the United States, and but we don't know much about her time in Canada, particularly about her time in St. Catharines. The books that have been written, the articles that have been written, they're not enough to fully capture the aspects of Harriet Tubman's life here in Canada. And our museum seeks to change this perspective. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to gather historical photographs, archival documents, the voices of African descendants, and we're using all of this to illuminate Canada's role in Harriet Tubman's journey and the broader story of Black settlement and resistance in this country. Another thing that we do as a second point, and I wouldn't take too much of your time, but another thing we do is we're also proud to host a journal, the Journal of African and African Diasporic Studies, which is a bilingual publication that brings together cutting-edge scholarship on Africa and its diasporas. Now the journal is under the leadership of co-editors, Ifi Okadigbo and Sheikh Ngurani. And the JADS, as we call it, JAADS, the Journal of African and Diasporic Studies, is expanding its research and its impact, offering a platform for decolonial thoughts, feminist critique, community-based research, global African history, and also reflections on the present day global African and African diasporic experiences across the world. Thirdly, the Tubman Institute at York is also actively engaged in international collaborations. So just last year in 2023 or 2024, I believe, we hosted a conference in Dakar, Senegal, exploring Africa and its diaspora's contributions to global knowledge and justice. Uh, Events that we organize from our conferences to our regular seminar series. We have a regular seminar series that we call Tubman Talks. In fact, the first one for this term, the fall term at York University, will be taking place, I believe, next week or in 2 weeks' time. And it's also going to be a reflection on African enslavement, on slavery, particularly from a North African perspective, by some of the scholars that Professor Lovejoy has trained, in addition to other specialists of the field. One of them, namely Professor Ismail Montana, who is based in the US and would also be speaking in that event. So we have talks across the year, throughout the entire academic year. We have talks focusing on different aspects of the global African experience, upholding, of course, the legacies of Harriet Tubman, constant pursuit of academic freedom in this context, not just freedom as in, and also a constant pursuit of a world in which there is justice and equity for all. So our gatherings, they're more than academic spaces or conferences. They are spaces of solidarity, spaces of imagination and collective action. And I am thrilled to announce our upcoming international conference. It's taking place from October 14 to 17. So next month, October 14, 17, in partnership with the Center for Reparations Research at the University of West Indies in Kingston, Jamaica. And the theme is Reflections on Repair, Responsibility, Resistance, and Reform, New Pathways. Yes, that's the theme. And so in this event that we're currently planning, we would bring together scholars, artists, activists, and community leaders, both here in Canada and in Jamaica, to explore how we can move from historical reckoning to real world transformation on conversations regarding reparations, resistance, reforms, responsibilities. And I invite you to join us to participate in this conference. The call for papers is now closed, but we are open to having non-presenting participants. Information about registration is currently on our website. This conference is particularly timely. especially as we enter the second international decade for people of African descent. That's from 2025 to 2034. And it is a moment to recommit ourselves to justice, to equity, to sustainability, not just in theory, but in practice. And at the heart of all our initiatives at the Tubman Institute is a simple but powerful idea that freedom is a collective journey. So Harriet Tubman understood this. She did not just escape slavery, she returned again and again to help others do the same. And she believed in the power of community, of shared struggle, and of unwavering hope. And we also carry that torch today. Right. Our institute is not just a space for research, it's a safe space for difficult conversations, for healing, and for imagining new futures. Whether we're hosting workshops on anti-Black racism, supporting student-led initiatives, or curating exhibitions that honor Black resilience, we are guided by Tubman's spirit, bold, compassionate, and unrelenting. One more thing that I also wanted to mention is that our renovated resource center at York Lanes on campus is home to rare books, donated artifacts, and archival materials that support both individual and collective research in case anyone here is interested. It is a place where students and community members alike can explore, learn, and contribute to our ongoing work of liberation. So, what can you do? You can attend our events, you can engage with our publications, and you can support our research clusters. You can volunteer, you can also donate, and or simply spread the word about the existence of this institute at York University. Um, you can help us ensure that Harriet Tubman's legacy is not just remembered, but lived. Because the truth is that Harriet Tubman's journey is not over yet. The torch that she carried, it still burns. And the pathways that she walked, the Underground Railroads, both physically and metaphorically, still call us. And the freedom that she fought for is still in many ways unfinished. Thank you very much for your attention.
That,
And I
thank you
look
very
forward to
much,
enjoying the rest
Professor.
of the evening.
Thank you very much, Professor Adebayo. Well said. I'm going to ask the audience if you have questions for Professor Adebayo or Professor Lovejoy dealing with the Tubman Center at York University, either how it was founded, currently, how to register. I saw that there were some questions in chat. We're going to have that towards the end of the session, and you can ask directly to either of the professors. We have Professor Lovejoy back, and let us hope that technical issue has been solved. Paul, I've already introduced you, and the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, that's amazing. I'm hearing an echo. I don't know why, but that won't bother me as long as you're not.
Well, I'm not sure what's happening because I see two Paul Lovejoys now.
Well, that's because I have my lap on my computer on at the same time because one of them won't work one way and the other won't work the other way. I'm gonna try X-ray and we'll see what happens. Are you still there?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
Professor Lovejoy, I think you need to mute one of the devices
that's
so
probably
that the sounds will
No, I
not.
left the other one. I'm only on one. Can you hear me?
It's clearer
Yeah.
now, yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Then if you can hear me now and you may not be able to see me. I
We
have no
cannot,
idea.
we can't see you, but we can hear you.
Well, then that's going to be enough. Please,
All right.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
So I want to talk about the Harriet Tubman Institute and how it came into existence
Mhm.
and what has happened with it is potential and significant. Because I think it's really very, very important that this institute does exist, that it exists in Canada, and that it has now a tradition and it's established. and it's part of our institutional framework in the country that we deal with the history of all people, Black people, everybody, and that we have an honest and straightforward approach to history so that we understand what happened, because slavery was a crime against humanity. And we have to deal with that issue, and we have to confront it, and we always have had to. I was trained at the University of Wisconsin at a very fortunate time. This is my background, which actually is very important to the founding of the Tubman Institute, because I happened to be there at a time where a number of people that went on, senior scholars from African countries, Alagua, all DK, all these people who were the pioneers in teaching of African history and African institutions are recognized. We were students together. It was a time when women were already very much prominent in our group. Gender issues had been brought to the fore and confronted. We were a community, and we were in action. When we went out and did research, and we went to a lot of different universities in a lot of different countries and founded institutions. And my good fortune was that I was in Canada. I came to Canada because of an earlier American crisis, the Vietnam War, and I was so happy to get out of the United States and get a job in Canada. At that time, York University, was a couple of buildings in a cornfield. Now it's the center of the metropolis. It's unbelievable, the transformations that take place. Well, the York History Department and the Humanities Division in particular at York University were the kind of crucible that allowed people to really create in an academic sense and to train and to do research on a global level. And my good fortune was that I was part of that. And I came from a background where, for me, my research was all centered in Africa. I was trained in African history. I went to Africa. I learned to speak Hausa. I taught at Amadou Bello University. I published my first book. I've published 50 books. I published my first book in Nigeria. This was political. This was a commitment. This was commitment that people are people, and you work with them. My students who come and study with me. This was inspirational in my life. Without the support of the Social Science and Humanities Research Council, it couldn't have happened. And I had the wonderful experience of not only being vice president of council at a period of time, but even as acting president for a very brief period. This is a wonderful country. This is a country that has tried to confront its problems and recognize history as history. And everyone has history. Everyone. My primary research now, and my focus for a long time, is on biography. I want to know who the people were, what they did, what can we know about them. And that was all inspirational. I was able to bring together a bunch of scholars and a bunch of graduate students, and we had the most amazing 3-week summer institute at York University in 1997, and it was scholars that we were in Portuguese, in Spanish, in French, and in English, and we were together for 3 weeks, and we bonded, and we formed an international collaborative that was the basis of the Tubman Institute. Absolutely was international. It was Canadian-based, and it was very, very important. And our initial focus, and what we called ourselves, and this was related to getting an SSHRC grant, was the Nigerian Hinterland Project. We didn't want to call it Nigeria because it was broader than what's modern Nigeria. It wasn't all of Africa, because one of our things we were trained to do and to show was that African history was its history. And it was just as knowable as any other history. And it was just as important as any other history. And that was our mission, to do that. And to bring to the fore to the African diaspora, to the study of Africans globally, the importance of knowing the history of Africa. When I went to teach at Amadou Bello University, there were 4 universities in Nigeria. Now there are 130 universities in Nigeria. Now, we can argue over quality, we can argue over uh, uh, we can argue over all kinds of issues, but I can tell you that's a heck of a lot more history departments than there were when I was around. The kind of history that's being done in Africa, in Nigeria, in other places is so exciting. And to help to create an institute at York University that helps to link with all of those initiatives. And the Tubman Institute grew out of that. It grew at a time when I happened to be a recipient of the first group of Canada Research Chair. And it happened in a way that I coincided with a significant funding from SSHRC. And I just said to myself, listen, you can't just use this to produce a ton of research and a ton of publications. You have to institutionalize it because it has to become central to the fabric of universities in Canada, that we have centers that focus on global Africa as part of the history of all of us, because it's all our history, as Marcus Garvey would say, where there's only one race, the human race. And that was the motivating factor. It was a fantastic experience to put together the Tubman Institute. And to bring together a group of people that have produced an enormous quantity of research. They're at, my former students alone are at 8 different Canadian universities, universities in the United States, universities in Ghana, universities in Nigeria. This was important. Collaboration, internationalism, sponsorship, breaking through the terrible conditions of academia in which scholars from the North go to countries of the South and steal all the research and bring it back and publish it with Yale University Press. And we wanted to break through that, which is why we started a series with Africa World Press, again, named in honor of Harriet Tubman. Why Harriet Tubman? Because she was on both sides of the border, because she was a woman, because she was a leader. She wasn't just the Underground Railroad. She started an old age home. Black people. I mean, you look at her life. Here's this girl that was hit in the head with a metal retainer for slaves by infuriated slave owners, and therefore suffered blackout. What Rosemary didn't say about Harriet was, any time that she was going south and bringing people back, she could pass out. She couldn't see. She had terrible headaches all the time. She was sick all the time. Look what she did. She met with John Brown again and again and again. They planned how to experiment together. She went behind enemy lines in South Carolina to warn people, black people, that Union troops were going to do a raid into their area, so they'd be get ready to do all the damage they could. Man, that's why we named after her. Look at her. She worked for all of these key people in the United States that were fought slavery. She risked her life. What a model of a person. And cross border. And boy, we know how important that is today. We haven't, of course, we recognize it always, but we really can see it. Gee, we need more people like her to fight for us, right? Everything. And that's what the Harriet Tubman Institute was founded to do. And I think my successors and the direction that it's gone have been fantastic. And it's one of the great pleasures of my life that uh, something that I started um, and, and enjoyed immensely has blossomed into what it's able to do today. And if we can make Harriet Tubman better known and what she did, and if we can uncover, which we can, the countless numbers of Black people, their biographies. My latest book is on somebody who finished his autobiography in Chatham. Now, he didn't always live in Canada, but he certainly has a strong Canadian connection. He knew Harriet Tubman because they were both uh, they were associates. They knew Frederick Douglass. This was the group. And the guy that I'm studying, a Muslim by the name of Fakwa, who came from, who ultimately from what's now northern Benin in West Africa. Um, uh, it's an amazing story because, and this is going to be difficult for some people to understand, I think, because the Underground Railroad is the focus. But no. We got to go beyond the Underground Railroad. Like Muhammad Gardo Maswakwa, he crossed the border not as a fugitive. When he was a fugitive from New York City, he went to Haiti. He later came back to the United States and got an education at a little-known place called Central College near Syracuse. And then ends up coming to Canada as a protege of Garrett Smith, as Harriet Tubman was a protege of Garrett Smith. And if you don't know who Garrett Smith was, he ran for president in 1756 on the Liberty Party ticket. He was an abolitionist. He was also an extremely wealthy landowner and developer. And his whole story and his connection to Canada is really very important. That cross-border, Garrett Smith ran the steamship line on Lake Erie and gave free passage to anybody who was Black. Didn't ask questions. You running away? Get on. That was Garrett Smith. So Garrett Smith, just like Harriet Tubman, and they were very close, was a feminist. Not just against racism, not just against slavery. They were feminists. Garrett Smith you realize, was one of the financiers of the Harvard Raid Ferry that Harriet Tubman and John Brown organized. You see how it all comes together? That's why we need something like the Harriet Tubman Institute. We need to know where people came from. They didn't come from Africa. They came from somewhere. And we can know the history of those somewhere. And we're doing it. And that was why the focus initially was on the Nigerian hinterland, because a very significant proportion of enslaved Africans came from either Yoruba or Igbo or Vibio or Hausa backgrounds. And at the same time, it was also an area that supplied a lot of people across the Sahara. And we want to do this globally. We're not just after, transatlantic. We're after trans-Saharan. We're after Indian Ocean. We're after slavery. We want to end it. And it's no use just, pretending that, well, what would the world be like if we didn't have slavery? The truth is, we got today to where we are today because of slavery. We have to realize that, and we have to deal with the consequences. And that's what the Harriet Tubman Institute is all about. And I think that's what is being taught, not just at York, but of course across Canada now, everywhere, all over the place. It's wonderful. The transformation I've seen in in my life in terms of the knowledge about Africa and the knowledge about African history and what people know today. It's really a major, major transformation. It just makes, what Trump is doing even more evil and more wicked. And because my ancestors founded the Republican Party as an anti-slavery party. Lovejoy, you look him up online. Elijah Ferris Lovejoy, Owen was. You'll see him. Elijah Ferris Lovejoy, the first white person to be killed fighting slavery in the United States. Owen Lovejoy, leader of the radical Republicans in the Congress that wanted to give 40 acres of a mule to all the former enslaved people at the end of the Civil War, but died and therefore didn't succeed in having it implemented in Congress. Listen, we got to deal with our history. We have to deal with people as people. We have to find out what they did, who they were, where they came from, and we can do it. And when we, and that means we have to go back to
Professor
Africa.
Lovejoy, I could listen to you all night. It's fascinating.
That's fine.
Unbelievable.
Thank you.
It's just that we have 5 more speakers, 2 regular speakers and 3 commentators before we go to question.
Well, thank you for stopping me. I was frustrated because of the technical issue.
I think I'm going to read up on American history. I just don't know enough. I mean, the Lovejoys and the founding of the Republican. I know about the founding of the Republican Party. I know about the election of 1856. I know about the election of 1860, but I don't know the role of the Lovejoy family, and I'm going to find out. You used a word that these studies have blossomed, but I'll tell you why. They've blossomed because you created a solid and enduring foundation for the Tubman Institute. And the ramification of that are enormous, not only for the quantity of research, but for its ability to reach out and build partnerships with scholars all over Africa and change the way we look at African history. I think what you've done is wonderful. And Professor Adebayo, who was quite articulate in the work right now of the Institute, which is building on what you built. We're going to allow the audience later to ask any questions they might have on the Institute to you and Professor Adebayo, but I would be remiss if I don't go on to the next speaker. Before I do, I want to recognize a few other people who haven't been recognized yet this evening, including David Foster, the president of the St. Lucia Canada Foundation, Frank Bayliss, a member of the board of United Against Hate Canada and a former candidate for the leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada, Joan Lee, the president of the West Island Black Community Association, Gemma Rayburn, the president of Playmass Caribbean Cultural Association, and I believe there were a couple of members of the board of the Antigua and Barbuda Association with us up to a couple of moments ago. I'm now going to go to Sharon Nelson, who's our next speaker. Sharon is the first vice president of the Jamaica Association of Montreal. She is also the president of the Caribbean Coalition Network, and she is the organizer of its annual Emancipation Day events. She'll update the audience on the work of the network to promote Emancipation Day. And as I believe I've already mentioned, Sharon is also an elected official in Montreal as a commissioner of the English Montreal School Board. Ms. Nelson, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you all tonight. And I just want to make a note that Mark Henry, who is the president of the Jamaica Association, is also the president of the coalition. But he's also the founder of the coalition, along with Nigel Clark, a former president of Barbados House. It's a pleasure to be with you and to talk about what we do in the coalition and why we started about 5 years ago. And the idea behind the coalition really was to bring together Caribbean nations to really support each other, to grow together, to share ideas, and to build and to grow. And on the call, we have a number of our members. We have Mr. Sanko from Guyana. We have Cynthia Wade from Barbados House, as well as Chris Bennett from Barbados House. We have David Foster from the St. Lucia Association. And as you mentioned, also Antigua and Barbuda, Julian Barrington, who are all who is the president of the Antigua and Barbuda Association. So 5 years ago, we started with the idea that we are stronger together than apart. And really the opportunity is to build and share together, and to learn from each other, share resources, share ideas, but also become the stronger voice. Because when we look at the Caribbean community in Montreal, we recognize that we are a large community, but as we are together, we are a bigger community to be able to speak with governments, speak with organizations, speak in many terms. But what we also wanted to recognize, and I was contemplating the scenery and, with Harriet Tubman and water and being in the Caribbean, I wanted to bring that imagery into this meeting. We share commonalities. And one of the first things our founders said was that we're much more alike than we are different. We share similarities. And emancipation is one of those similarities that we share within the Caribbean. So if you allow me, I have a short presentation. And I don't know if there it is.
There it is.
There it is. So this is who we are, the Caribbean Coalition. And we started, when we started in about 2019, we were 6 organizations. Now we are at 8 Caribbean organizations. And we are Antigua, Barbados, Guyana, Grenada, Jamaica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Trinidad. And these are, on this slide, you'll see the organizations that are in Montreal. These are the flags the people that we represent here in Montreal. And I must say that we also have connections with our government officials in these various territories. Not only islands, Guyana will say that it's not an island, but it is a part of the Caribbean, and we recognize that. So we created a logo about 5 years ago as well. Now, and the aim, as I mentioned earlier, is to really symbolize who we are as Caribbean people. The coalition's aim is to strengthen bonds and to have a voice, but also, as I mentioned, create opportunities, share knowledge, and support. And we did not want to incorporate any flags into this logo because we wanted our organization to grow. And so not limited, because our mantra, or where we follow, is the CARICOM model. We are following that model of CARICOM nations, where each organization has a government representative. So if you can slip it to this CARICOM slide. And that's what the basis of the coalition is all about, really supporting that model, and with many of the ideals that are a part of the CARICOM. In terms of people, we are about 20 individuals that make up the board of the coalition. And as you see here highlighted are Mark Henry and Nigel Clark, who are the founders. And you will see the 8 presidents as well as part of this this grouping. So how does emancipation come into that? We decided that we not only needed to represent these things that learn about emancipation from the Caribbean perspective. And so we started doing that in 2021, where we had the presidents of the then 6 organizations that were part of the coalition really showcase them and really talk to them about what we are as an entity in Montreal. And that was really impressive. We had all those leaders in the Caribbean, from Antigua right back to St. Vincent at the time, send their words and really support the coalition and the idea of the coalition. And then we went on to things that bound us in the Caribbean. In 2022, we spoke about rum and the history of rum and the important history of rum in the Caribbean. That became a product of slavery, but now it is an identifier across the world. When you talk about Mount Gay, you talk about Jamaican white rum, the history of Black people and what they had to go through really chronicles the history of it chronicles the history of rum in the Caribbean. We then talked about things that were important to us, like the game of cricket. And last but not least, on August 3rd of this year, we talked about the different traditions and how they came out of the African experience, as well as some European experience, colonial experience in the Caribbean. We recognize Black History Month. We definitely attend our other organizations' events. And we also, part of emancipation and part of slavery is Carnival in the Caribbean. And for the last 2 years, in 24 and this past summer, we organized the Caribbean Carnival, which is not just about the images of people dancing on the streets in costumes. There's a lot more to that. There's a lot more to the parade and the whole idea of Carnival. Here in Montreal, we call it the Montreal Caramas Festival. But the whole idea is really to talk about the history again of slavery in an artistic format. And if one understands Carnival and how that was the slaves that incorporated that into their everyday life or their yearly celebrations, we also want to bring the stories of Caribbean people here in Montreal and across Canada to the streets of Montreal. So in closing, we have created a stronger bond. We are a growing organization. We are a young organization, but nonetheless, I think the identity of who we are as a group of Black people here in Montreal and the different representations that we have is far-reaching. We've been speaking to our high commissioners. They've indicated that they've not seen any other grouping such as this across Canada. So Montreal has really started a movement, if you will, of recognizing the history and important history of Black people, not only here in Montreal, but also where we're coming from, many of us are coming from in the Caribbean, and also promoting that idea that emancipation, August 1st, 1834, is an important day to remember. It's an important day to etch in our minds and also to learn not only about the slavery and how it impacted Black people and Black history, but not only Black people, but everyone, what also came out of emancipation. You know, leadership, products, services, realities that people continue to live today. So with that, we have, I've always put the list of presidents. If anyone on the call is interested in learning more or contacting the members of the coalition, you're more than welcome to do so. It's a fast slide, but I know in the video, the names and contact information for the coalition will be there. And we welcome your insights, your comments, your thoughts that will add to what the coalition is today. So thank you so much, Mr. Rotran, for the opportunity to talk about the Caribbean Coalition and the fact that we take the opportunity to recognize Black people here in Montreal, Black people in the Caribbean, and essentially on a larger scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. United Against Hate Canada stands solidly behind the Caribbean Coalition Network and the work that you do to promote knowledge of Emancipation Day. I have to say, despite your excellent work, Emancipation Day is virtually unknown in the province of Quebec. And our next speaker, Max Stanley Bazin, the president of the Black Coalition of Quebec, will partially explain why. He'll tell us that Emancipation Day is little known here in Quebec. including among persons in the Francophone Black community, and why the coalition's actually chosen to champion August 23rd as the International Day to commemorate the transatlantic slave trade and its abolition rather than Emancipation Day, because UNESCO was giving support for that. And the events of August 23rd happened in Saint Dominique, which is Haiti, a French-speaking country, and is far better known in Quebec. That being said, we agree with the Caribbean Coalition Network and its efforts to promote knowledge nationally of Emancipation Day. Far more work needs to be done, and we need to build dialogue between different groups working individually in different parts of the country. Let's put it together under a big umbrella, and together we will find that we probably have a greater ability to reach a larger number of people and spread knowledge about the history of slavery not only in this country but throughout the British world, and its ultimate abolition via the Act of 1833 and the coming about of Emancipation Day on August 1st, 1834. It is indeed, Ms. Nelson, as you said, an important day to remember. The Black Coalition Quebec was founded in 1969 in defense of human rights and social justice. The coalition has the service of all community groups and individuals in defense of their right to equal justice. While the activities of the coalition are mostly concentrated in Quebec, it gives service to Canada as a whole. I mentioned before my dear friend Dan Phillip, who passed away a year and a half ago, and who was a major voice in this province fighting overt racism and discrimination. Wasn't that long ago when discrimination in housing and the ability to not hire someone who was Black because of his color of skin was a reality in Quebec. Dan's work and the Black Coalition in Quebec largely changed that. Max Stanley Bazin has stepped in over the last couple of years to become the new president. Max Stanley will address us now. Mr. Bazin, the floor is yours. We can't hear you, Max Stanley. Okay, there. I think you're on now. Okay, Max Stanley Bazin? I think Max Stanley may be having a technical issue of some sort. I can see him on the list of individuals. So we're going to go to the next person who's going to give comments, and we're going to come back to Max Stanley. I had asked 3 people to give comments on what the speakers had said and offer some insights. The first will be Dr. Dorothy Williams, who is an educator, a historian, a storyteller, advocate. Okay, I'm sorry, but Mr. Bazin has sent a message that he is apparently having some difficulty. Mr. Bazin, are you there? We're going to go back to Dorothy. She is an educator, a historian, a storyteller, advocate. She is a well-known author. Her books have included Blacks in Montreal, 1628 to 1986, and A History of Black Montreal. She's also written the ABCs of Canadian Black History, a kit for educators, which she's pitching at education departments in Canada with some frustrations in Quebec. An excellent effort. Dorothy, would you address us now?
Okay, well, I've only got a few minutes, and thank you for inviting me to this very, very interesting moment in the struggle that I've been on. Like Rosemary, we're talking decades. This has been an issue, the issue to have Black history taught in the schools, to try to reverse the miseducation that Canadians live under, the ignorance that is 100% widespread in this country, that 200 years of slavery existed in Canada, and yet not a word, not a word in the history books. And I've been talking about this for many decades, that we need to change our direction. We need to help our kids that are in the school understand some of the dynamics that are going on today, and understanding the first 200 and then bringing that into the 20th and then the 21st century is going to give our society, particularly those young kids, a lot more understanding of how systemic racism operates in Canada, why there are calls for, as your speakers who have already spoken have talked about, the call for historical justice and teaching in the schools. I've I've put down on here on my my paper some key points that I thought were really germane to this discussion. I mean, for me, as a historian listening to this, it's really great to understand the movers and shakers in the country who are trying to make a difference for making the development of history, the historical narrative of Blacks in this country more ubiquitous, like something that all Canadians need to be aware of. But I would also love to know a lot more about some of the areas in this country that were touched by slavery that we often don't talk about. And I'm thinking of Prince Edward Island. I'm thinking of New Brunswick. I'm thinking about certainly how widespread slavery was in Quebec. Most people don't know that we've identified over 70 towns and places within the province of Quebec that had slavery. So it wasn't just concentrated in Montreal. And it's important for us to really explore how slavery moved people and helped move the economy. So a couple of points that I just want to share with you. I think as the speakers have been talking, certain elements that they've shared. Rosemary talking about slavery did not define us, and I that is point on. I think that is such a critical, I guess, truism that we need to understand that the push to get slavery recognized is not just because Blacks need to be acknowledged, but rather this is part of the story and the grandeur of the Canadian narrative. So I talk about in the ABCs of Canadian Black History Kit, which you mentioned, Marvin, a tool that is actually used to help educators, adults learn about slavery, learn about the Black experience right across this country. And the point of doing that is because they don't know any more than anybody else. And slavery was not the only element that defined our role models, our input, our influence, and the legacies that we've given to the other provinces. Professor Alabayo was talking about something that I would have loved for him to have continued, which is the legal legacy that Tubman had left behind. This is actually brand new. I had never heard about that. I'd be really, really intrigued to follow that up. It's also been very enlightening to hear how Professor Lovejoy was talking, I guess, and opened up talking about we need an honest, straightforward history. I'll tell you, yes, we do, but it's not one that is without bias, because we come from a certain perspective that says we need to understand this from this particular lens. So, and I think the thing that he said that was most significance is just underscoring the fact that slavery, hundreds of years of slavery, both in the United States and Canada and the southern hemisphere of the Americas, was a crime against humanity. And that is something that I think we need to address and to help by educating, helping people to understand what that means, what that entails. And thank you, Sharon, because she was the last speaker, and I just want to say thank you because you really helped to illuminate for me the connection between the West Indies and both the performative and also the really deep connections that have been developed in the Caribbean community within this country that also speaks to that historical slavery that also took place in the West Indies as well as Canada and the United States. So at this point, I'm just going to stop there, Marvin.
Thank you, Dorothy.
What I've taken
Well,
from
well
what,
said as always, concise and very, very clear.
yeah,
And thank you for continuing to plot ahead with the ABCs of Canadian Black History Kit. One day it'll probably be required reading in schools, but we still have to get there, right?
well, it's certainly taken up in the Ontario. Quebec has
Yeah, I know.
no interest.
I know. I live in Quebec, and one of the issues I worked on was Holocaust education. And this province was probably the most difficult nut to crack, whereas
Exactly.
every other province
Exactly.
modernized its curriculum. In Quebec, we have gotten nowhere. That being said, I'm going to try to go back to Max Stanley Bazin. I spoke to Max Stanley on the phone for a moment. I think we've corrected the problem. Max Stanley, can you take the floor now? All right, in which case we're going to go to our next speaker, and I'm going to call him back with the hope that we get the situation resolved. Our next speaker is Yvonne Sam. She is a retired head nurse, a former secondary school teacher. She's a prolific writer and author at Montreal Community Contact. She's been published in the Montreal Gazette, the Toronto Star. She is the 2014 winner of the Governor General's Caring Canadian Citizen Award. She's been named a Black History Month laureate. She's named as one of the 100 accomplished Black Canadian women. She's won awards from Concordia University. And during the long time I served as a city councillor, she was a staunch ally in efforts to focus the light on poor relations between the Montreal Police Department and minorities, particularly the Black community, which did lead to some change at City Hall. Yvonne, would you please take the floor?
Well, thank you very much, Marvin. Thank you, everyone, and good night. I'm just going to introduce myself in a different way from what Marvin said. I am on the reason why I'm on the anti-racism committee for the School of Nursing of McGill, because Harriet Tubman was a nurse. Tonight we have revisited. She was a nurse, a spy, a soldier, and a relentless advocate for freedom. She did not just carry people across borders, but hope across centuries. Tonight I asked her to, we've listened to all that has been said about her, and I asked that we leave committed, not just inspired, but committed to teaching our story in every school, because I'm a secondary school teacher. I taught for 30 years in the English Montreal School Board. And even today, Harriet Tubman is just a passing thought in the minds of many school children. And university level, some have heard of her, but they couldn't place exactly where she figured in Canadian history. There's a call out there. That brings us to the point where there's a strong call to make Harriet Tubman's history, Canada's history. Her legacy will remain with us because she used our shores to bring a different look to oppression, a different face to freedom. It called on us to decolonize and diversify the curriculum so that everyone knows about her. She risked her life. She risked her life to lead people away from oppression. Today, we're called upon, in her honor, to examine systems in Quebec, in Canada, that continue to disproportionately criminalize blacks, indigenous people, like overrepresentation in the prisons, incarceration, guarding, or over policing. Harriet left us with so much food for thought. She left us that I don't think putting a monument or that is enough for her. Is enough. No. Harriet's story also tells us about we should tell her story in a way that shows feminine leadership, women being leaders, and black resistance. That has been looked at also in the context of what she did. If she were here today, I would like to ask, what would she be doing? What way would she be opening? What door would she be going towards? She believed in building strong communities. Education was a prime for her. And as I close, I would like to close with a famous quote. I think it's African bent. And it goes like this. As long as the lions have no historians, it will be the exploits of the hunters that will be celebrated, rather than the brave of the lions. So I ask us all to leave here tonight. Harriet says, when we hear her story, as we listen to her story, some of us know it more than others. When we honor Harriet Tubman, we're not just looking backward. No, we're not. We're looking forward, or we should be looking forward. Her struggle asks each and every one of us, are we dismantling the systems that hold you back today? Or are we just praising the past while leaving the present unchanged? Tonight, when you leave tonight, what you're going to do with what you've heard? I prepared to take her memory forward. Not to praise the past, what she did, but to take it forward, and the present will become changed. That would be my plea, if you want to call it my plea, to all of us. Harriet had once said, every great dream begins with a dreamer. Tonight, may we all dare to dream as she did. Fiercely, bravely, and together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yvonne. I just want to update the audience. We're having some difficulty with Mr. Bazan. I've just sent him the link again, and hopefully he'll be able to get back on because he dropped off after we thought we had fixed the problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to our next commentator, and hopefully we can get him on as the last speaker. And our next commentator is the first Black person elected to Spruce Grove, Alberta City Councillor, and that is Jan Gillette. Jan comes from a distinguished family of historians, and she will tell us a little bit about her family history, about being elected in Spruce Grove. Before being elected, she was a trustee at the Spruce Grove Public Library. She was recognized as a pillar for the community, and she's been a staunch advocate for Emancipation Day. And in her message to me, she said one of the problems in Spruce Grove is Emancipation Day is merged with Indigenous recognition, and she felt that takes away from the recognition of the history of the Black community, not only in Alberta, in Canada, and the history of slavery. Her grandmother was Rella Ailstock Braithwaite, a celebrated historian whose name may be familiar to you. So I will ask Jan to take the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Marvin, for giving me this opportunity to share today. Is everybody hearing me well?
Yes.
Excellent. So I live in a city about 40,000 people, and when I moved here about 30 years ago, I was one of only 2 or 3 Black people who lived in this community. So over the last 15 years or so, more Black people have moved into the community, but many of them are actually direct immigrants from Africa. So this community has not had much exposure, if any, to the history of Black Canadians. And that history needs to start being part of our broader Canadian history. So right now, I feel like there's a huge part of our past that is missing, that's not talked about, that's not acknowledged. And it makes it harder for communities like mine to fully understand the significance of August 1st, 1834, Emancipation Day, or the contribution even of significant figures like Harriet Tubman. So I first made history as the first Black individual elected to Spruce Grove City Council in 2021. I ensured that Black History Month was celebrated and used as a time of education here. As well, I was instrumental in getting Emancipation Day officially recognized in our community, making sure that this vital day was acknowledged and celebrated. But however, when it came to crafting the wording of the city's proclamation, and Indigenous was also included along African descendants. I believe that this dilutes the unique history of Black Canadians, downplays the horror of chattel slavery that Africans endured, and African descendants endured in Canada, including Indigenous experiences in the same proclamation. For my community, shows a lack of awareness and sensitivity to distinct historical significance of Emancipation Day. I originally came from Ontario. My family's history was deeply tied to this story. My ancestor was Henry Dangerfield Lawson, who was an enslaved individual in Virginia in the 1840s, and he escaped into Maryland. Along the way, abolitionists provided him with shelter and essential things, but most importantly, directions on the Underground Railroad. He eventually crossed into freedom in Canada and settled in the Queens Bush settlement, which is one of the earliest Black communities in this country. His escape would not have been possible without the path that Harriet Tubman blazed. She gave courage and hope to many enslaved people like my ancestor. Her name carried weight, and people knew that freedom was possible because she had led so many to safety. Tubman's courage created a ripple effect that allowed families like mine to build new lives in Canada. So from Henry Dangerfield Lawson came generations of resilience and leadership in my family. As you said, my grandmother is Rella Braithwaite. She carried that legacy as a community historian, writer, storyteller. She preserved our family's history and the wider history of Black Canadians. She collaborated with the Ontario Ministry of Education to develop a Black study guide for the classrooms in around 1978. She served 3 terms as the co-president of the Ontario Black History Society, and she played significant roles in the formation of the Canadian Negro Women's Club and the National Congress of Women. Her work continues to this day in Ontario in the Rella Braithwaite Foundation, with support educational initiatives and programs that preserve Black heritage to ensure that future generations understand the struggles and triumphs of their ancestors. My great aunt Addie Ailstock broke barriers in 1951 when she was ordained by the British Methodist Episcopal Church, becoming the first Black woman minister in Canada. So I've also had the privilege of contributing to my community. I founded a group here called Black Heritage and Cultural Kinship Society. We're a local group of African and African descendant people, and our goal is to empower our community through education, connection, and celebration. So in Alberta, teaching Black history is not actually required by our provincial curriculum. Social studies encourages students to learn about diverse perspectives, but it doesn't explicitly include Black history. So there's some references to slavery and a few experiences about enslaved individuals, but it's very limited and it lacks any kind of real depth. So I think this is so important to honestly teach the history of Black Canadians. And in Western Canada, there's sometimes this perception that slavery wasn't that bad or it didn't really happen here in Canada. But the truth is, slavery in Canada lasted for over 200 years, and it was brutal and dehumanizing. And we can't sugarcoat that history. I think it's vital to understand the courage and sacrifice and resilience of those who fought for freedom, including the work of Harriet Tubman. She led countless people to safety in Canada and helped create foundations for families like mine to thrive. So some of our local grade 5 classes read the Underground Railroad in February, and they often invite me into the classroom to share a nice family story. And I do my best to connect historical fiction to real life experiences to provide the students with deeper understanding of our history. But it's such a shame that there isn't more education, that it isn't required here, and that leaves such a gap for many students as they grow up out in Western Canada. They don't fully understand Black history, and I believe that means they don't fully understand Canadian history. So Harriet Tubman was such a central figure. She showed incredible courage and determination, and I think understanding her contributions and the larger story of Black emancipation is essential for an honest, inclusive view of our Canadian history. And slavery did not define us, but I think it shaped the struggle and resilience of our ancestors. And it's important to recognize people like Harriet Tubman in our overall history. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. What you said has a lot of resonance with me. After I left City Council, I did work for the League for Human Rights for B'nai B'rith Canada, and our studies showed that Holocaust education was extremely weak right across Canada. In fact, in several provinces, it was a student was able to go through school with never having any instruction about the Holocaust. And Alberta is one of the provinces we met with, and we met with the education minister who kicked us up to the premier. We actually met with the premier, who was shocked to discover this, who told the education minister, fix it. Well, Alberta did. They made it mandatory. Ontario still is the gold standard, but the teaching of the Holocaust is far better now in Alberta. And I say that because it just takes some lobbying and contacting of the province to tell them there's a real gap. And if you can make a cogent case, you might find that they don't know that this is missing from the curriculum and needs to be addressed. So you now have some homework out of this call to call the education minister in Alberta and insist on a meeting. The legislature is not that far from Spruce Grove. I think you can get there in a half an hour or so. So there you are. Thank you for being here with us. I hope you'll remain in contact because we want something good to come out of this call. This is just a preliminary thing. So we'll go back to Max Stanley Bazin. I see his name on the list again. Max Stanley, la parole est le vote. The floor is yours.
Hear me now? Hello?
Yeah.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you
okay?
now. Yes. Can't see you, but we can hear you, and that's fine.
It's okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Each of the people present here is a good person and an important person for the present and the future. We cannot change the past, but we can change the present. Harriet Tubman Project paid tribute to a courageous woman who did a lot for the fight against slavery. In the life, you can be a hero or not. Harriet Tubman made a choice, the good choice. Harriet Tubman was a slave, but Harriet Tubman was a Black woman with a strong desire for freedom, for herself and her brother and sister. Harriet Tubman escaped slavery at the risk of her life. She helped other slaves escape many times. The Underground Railroad, it wasn't a real train, but a secret network of words created with the help of Harriet Tubman. It was a series of shelter and people who helped slave escape. Intelligence, courage, and determination, this is the face of Harriet Tubman. She helped many slaves find freedom. For the those she saved, she represented hope and strength. During the Civil War, Harriet Tubman worked for the Union Army. This army was the one fighting against slavery. She served as a nurse, cook, and spy. The Harriet Tubman project today aims to pass on her legacy and values. It serves as remember of her courage and spirit of solidarity. Lecture, exhibition, and educational resource. This project aims to inspire current generation. You can make a difference even the face of extreme oppression. We can make a difference. We have a duty. We must fight. Our fight is to destroy systemic discrimination, to eliminate racial profiling, and also destroy systemic racism. We have many more tools to succeed. We have even more to succeed. Some of these people are in power. Harriet Tubman is a universal symbol of freedom, justice, and tenacity. Her example reminds us important to defend human dignity, protect those who suffer, and believe that a better future is always fight against injustice for equity and equality, like everyone here. Thanks you all, and thank you to Marvin Rotran, who has always fight against injustice for equity and equality, like everyone here. Very thanks. Okay, I finish.
Merci, Max Stanley. J'ai toujours vous considéré comme un ami, un allié dans la lutte contre le racisme. I want to say that I've always been close with the Black Coalition. Dan Phillip was a dear friend, was a constituent, so could always give me heck if I didn't perform well, and he always laughed about it. But Max Stanley has had big shoes to fill, and he's filled them with honor. And the Black Coalition continues to be an organization respected at City Hall and in the Quebec legislature, in the National Assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, I really probably have to improve my skills as a choreographer. This call was supposed to end about 8:15. It's after 9 o'clock. There was going to be about a 15-minute question period. I wonder if people still do have questions. There were one or two hands up earlier. They disappeared. I'd like to call the call, let's say 9:15 at the latest. If someone has a question, would you put up your hand? I'll call the first couple of questions on the proviso. The questions are to one of the speakers and that they're relatively concise.
Je ne sais pas si on m'entend encore. Je vais quitter, moi.
Oui, on entend, Max Stanley.
Okay, je vais quitter. I left now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks. Okay, bye.
Mr. Bazin had to leave right now as he had another obligation. Is there any questions? I don't see any, in which case I'm going to thank everyone and let you know that we will provide a YouTube of the call. We'll also have this video, which will circulate, and we'll contact everyone again about possible next steps. I've already given Jan some homework to do, and I'm relentless. By the way, a good buddy of mine's the mayor of Edmonton. So go out and knock on his door and recruit. All right, we're going to call this call over. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We will be back to everyone on the call. I want to thank our speakers in particular. Rosemary, thank you for coming through at short notice. Thank you to Professor Lovejoy, Professor Adebayo, Sharon Nelson, Max Stanley Bazin, and our three commentators. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.